As a result of the research we've done and the points highlighted by Kemi and by Linton, and just let you know, it's Manchester Metropolitan University. I've just been corrected by my esteemed colleague, Edgy Bowler, and also to make sure you don't see the red paint on the back of my walls. I've made it come around a little bit. But this is a really, really deep, spiritual, Afrocentric individual who's talking about his experience of race. And this, I think, is one of the best podcasts I've ever heard in my life, because I think it really encapsulates the discussion we had this morning. So the aim, just go to the next slide. From that, we've had a subgroup. I've got a big thank to Anna. Hope she comes on later on. From the peer review, we've had people now that want to do this level of investigation in terms of some of the issues around alliance, power, definitions, interconnected identity, some of those powerful issues. We've got these 3 people here that are interested in now doing a PhD. Antonio, I'm not sure if he's online today, wants to do something around advanced choice document, which could be, if people know about it, it's a document which is now part of the mental health legislation about making advanced choice statements about how you want to be treated under the Mental Health Act. And people think it will reduce admissions and restrictions and community treatment orders. Others here want to do things around an Afrocentric cultural therapeutic approach. And Danny's doing a really good project about peer, but her peer one is really creative, because she's saying that we should peer support across our worlds to destabilize our worlds to move to real equality. That means racialized lived experience working with clinicians so they understand their practices and implications. So what was the training about? Just go to the next slide. So I'm not going to go through it. So it's something we set up with Lancet, and we wanted to look at, so how are we going to train some of the issues that Gary, those new generation of people, to come into the system and start engaging in something that's quite powerful, peer reviewing documents. What sort of skills do they need? But we wanted to develop different critical skills, not just academic reflection, but would the documentation really make a difference? And would it influence what we call injustice in terms of racialized mental health services? And so the outcomes was to widen the pool and get more people submitting papers. Let's go on to the next one. So this is what we did. It was a very short course, over 5 weeks. And I'm privileged and proud that we had quite a number of people who went through this. The introduction, they went through what is the peer review model, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail. What is a process of peer review, and also how to review an article. So we really wanted to get people a bit of an introduction to what this actually means. And I'm looking forward to Linton and Kemi's feedback, because the process of learning was not really culturally conducive to some of our experiences as wanting to be engaged in lived experience peer review. I'm just going to show you how this emerged through the next slide. So obviously at the heart of the work we did, and I've got to say a big thank you to Linton about the whole notion of Fallon's white mask and black skin. It really is a crucial conceptual framework to understand your identity, your cultural responsibility, and things you're forced to wear to stop you having cultural impact. And so when we started the training, we had 16 people that started it, and we just knew that some people would drop out, some people may not want to be there online, some people may wanted to do it afterwards. 8 people have completed the 12 modules so far, and have now become peer review qualified. Number of people have written, if I show you the complexity of writing of some of these people, it's just astounding how we're denying real genius and talent in our community. As mentioned, 4 showed an interest in PhD. I'm really proud that we're going to try and set up a PhD mentoring program for people with lived experience to start changing not just the research process, but things around epistemology, the knowledge from a lived experience, how our world is conceptualized, and also how we address race equality and injustice in mental health systems. So most people were interested in aspects of the training. There was a strong feeling about race bias in the convention of writing and the peer review process. This is quite important because it replicates a lot of experiences people have had in the education system. And all the sessions are recorded, so you can go online and look at what we actually did. If I just go to the next slide, I've got a few people online and I've asked them to be as honest as possible about the training. There's no boundaries or whatever. So Linton or Kemi, or I don't know if Danny's there, just want to know if you could talk about your experience of the training as we discussed yesterday. And I'm going to go through what it's like to be trained as a peer review and what we actually did, because I think we can then be much more specific in our analysis about issues around whiteness and power. So this is the peer review workshop that we started. Each week, when we did the workshop, we also made specific reference that do we recognize our writers? And I think this is what Linton said. Do we recognize the contribution that writers such as Frantz Fanon, Malcolm X, Bell Hooks have made to theory change and the way we actually peer review documents? And so we got a fantastic picture of Frantz Fanon, and it's really sad, going back to what Kemi says, that when you talk to consultant psychiatrists or psychologists, they've never heard of Frantz Fanon. And in effect, that means they're not trained to work in a diverse background. So that was one of the things that came out quite strongly in what we wanted to do. Each training session started off with a learning. What is it you want to learn? So it's not about me instructing the way they want to learn. We actually asked the group, what is it you want to learn? What is it you wanted? Yeah. And we talked about the lived experience, about how does it actually link into the training. Just go to the next slide. So if you're on our courses, first thing we do every week, we celebrate our heritage and the contributions. And going back to one said, it was interconnected. So we did look at people, not just Black men, because there's a danger that you can replicate the same thing that other groups have done. White men dominate, then Black men dominate, but it was interconnected in terms of race, gender, sexuality, disability, people that have contributed. This is a picture of somebody by the name of Black Bell Hooks, who was a famous sociologist, anthropologist, and a peer reviewer in America. And she's written some really good, excellent books on whiteness, experiencing whiteness, challenging whiteness. And she talks about whiteness as terror. It's a fear that you face because it's unknown. You don't know its power. You don't know how it's going to affect you. So each week we use an important writer to stimulate and inspire that we could make a contribution to the way this teaching was taking place. And then we go to the next slide. So one of the things we did, this is Bell Hooks just before she died. We asked people it was a little test because sometimes our history or her story has been taken away from us. So we asked people, do you know who this is? And ironically, a lot of people didn't know who Bell Hooks was. And there's other people that our stories have been taken away from us. And also our legitimacy to have a knowledge base has been taken away from us. But also one thing that you wanted to change about the training, we encourage people, and it's really good to have Kemi and Linton and Danny all here today because it was about being a critical approach. What does this mean? Why are we doing it? What's it aiming to do? So I'm going to go to the next slide, and hopefully I want you just to play this and just tell me what you think. You can just play it. This is the first unit of the course.
Hello and welcome to the Elsevier Researcher Academy's Certified Peer Reviewer course. This course has been developed to help support and train peer reviewers and is designed to suit the needs of early career researchers, as well as act as a refresher course for more experienced referees. The Certified Peer Reviewer course has been designed with input from editors of top-tier journals and professional peer review experts. You can find out more about our speakers and editorial board on the right-hand side of your Researcher Academy screen. The course has been divided into 4 major sections. Each section is further arranged into manageable subsections to ensure that you learn the nitty-gritty of peer review in a practical, achievable manner, building your skills and confidence levels in the process. Section 1 of the course focuses on the what of peer review. We take a step back and explore what peer review is, when and why it was introduced, and how it adds value to publishing. We then consider the models of peer review and answer your questions on internal versus external peer review. This section also breaks down the typical peer review process to ensure a complete understanding of the system. Section 2 deals with the practicalities once you have received an invite to review. We look at how you should respond to a request and the issues that you need to consider before finalizing your decision. The third section focuses on the how of writing a helpful peer review report. Editors and authors are keen to hear your feedback, and this section ensures that you're fully conversant with what it takes to write a comprehensive and constructive report. We discuss comments to authors, comments to editors, ethical guidelines, and the sort of recommendation that you can suggest. Finally, Section 4 will help you round off your understanding of review activity, focusing on revisions, questions of confidentiality, and how you can be rewarded for your hard work and support to science. The course ends with a Test Your Knowledge module, which will ensure that you have grasped the most important parts of the course and help you identify and revise anything you might have missed or misinterpreted. The completion of this test also ensures that you receive your Certified Peer Reviewer certificate, which will verify your knowledge and understanding of peer review process and demonstrate to editors and others that you're a capable reviewer. Thank you for your interest in the course. If at any point you have any thoughts, suggestions, or questions, please reach out to us using the comment section. We also have a Researcher Academy Mendeley group dedicated to answering your questions and facilitating discussions of the issues that matter to you. The link to the group can be found on the right-hand side of your screen under the resources. Once again, we thank you for joining the course and wish you best of luck with your reviewing.
Colin, you're muted.
Yeah, as we go through this, I wanted just to use your feedback. Can you just tell me what you think about the course at the moment, how it's presented, how is it making you feel? Just put any words in the chat that you can, because I just want to look at how you are now evaluated, now being on this course, and I'm going to tell you what the course does next. So any words, you know, it's crap, I can't hear it, it's not useful, would be really useful to be put in the chat. If we go to the next slide, so I'm not going to go through it. This is what happens throughout all of them, yeah? So you're given so many units. The next one is introduction. I'm not going to play this. It's 37 minutes. You play it, it tells you the origins. And what's really critical about this slide, most of the origins go back to the 18th century and nothing references an African or an Afrocentric or diverse or newer diverse experiences. It's all centered on one experiences. So there was a major problem with the development and evolution of the model of peer review. And in effect, it's replicating the models of diagnosis that are used in mental health. This peer review is actually a diagnostic framework that controls the way you look at the world. And one of the things we felt is that how do we liberate people to review in a completely different historical experiences? So you can take that home and look at it. I'm not going to play it, but I just want you to go through to the next one. So this is what the peer review looks like as a training that we did. And Danny's absolutely right. It takes 4 hours to do. And you have to get 12 out of 12 units. And what's unusual about it the units are not in a logical order. So if you look at below, it's got 3.3, then it's got what can you expect, introduction, then 1.1. Now, if you're neurodiverse, or you, like me, got dyslexia, or you just can't understand things, this is a minefield. This is very difficult to teach because it's not relevant to people's experiences. So you're navigating through a world that's nothing about you. It's about somebody else. Actually, it replicates the pedagogy of teaching, which is not about empowering people to learn. And we just go to the next slide. Again, these are the 8 modules. 1.1 is the model of peer review. There's nothing from a diverse perspective. The peer review process is very one-dimensional. Going back to Kemi's point, how to be involved is critical, because if it's still reproducing the same old types of white network, this needs to be challenged. How do you get invited is a big issue, which Linton has raised, because if it's the same old people in the same old academic fears, it's a closed shop, and it doesn't allow people with lived experience to be involved in those processes. How to write a helpful report, we found that very difficult on the course. And what's next? So I'm just going you through what it was like to be on this training to become a peer review through this academic convention. If I just go to the next slide. Now I want you just to listen to the voice again, just for 2 minutes, and tell me what you think in the chat, your first impressions of hearing this if you're doing the training. If you can just press play, please.
Welcome to the module on the typical peer review process. My name is Patricia Gons-Morton. I am Dean Emeritus from the University of Utah College of Nursing. In addition, I am the editor of the Journal of Professional Nursing, which is the official journal of the American Association of Colleges of Nursing. I have served in the role as editor since 2013. Prior to this role, I was the editor of the journal AACN Clinical Issues. That journal was sponsored by the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. I served in that role for 7 years. Today, we will focus on the typical peer review process. I will cover topics including how the author submits their paper to the journal. Next, I will discuss the editor's initial evaluation of the paper so that the editor makes a decision for the paper to be either rejected or sent out for peer review. The editor selects reviewers for a paper. And finally, I will talk about the editor's role when reviewers are received and how the editor assesses the reviews received from the peer reviewers. So let's get started. First, the author will submit their article to a journal. Usually, in today's world, this is all done through the journal's electronic system. No longer are papers sent through the mail or through other kinds of services. Everything is done electronically. Ideally, before the author submits the paper, they will have read all of the author guidelines and followed them very closely. Unfortunately, this often does not occur, and that may be one stumbling block for the author in getting their paper considered for a journal, is that they did not follow the author guidelines.
Okay, stop it now because I'm falling asleep. Stop it, blimey. Sorry about that. So this is telling you what the typical, I'm concerned, why is it typical? And that's something we need. Why does it have to be this way? Why is it we follow these kind of like these academic conventions that can exclude people? If we go to the next one, So I don't want to put you through it, but there is a common theme about words, accents, and presentation. This is the last one we're going to listen to. We're going to do it for 2 minutes. Again, in the chat, begin to look at what can be improved. How does it make you feel? Is it actually useful? Just for 2 minutes, please.
Hi, thanks for joining me in our webinar about how to peer review a review article. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Matt Pavlovich. I'm the editor of Trends in Biotechnology. We're a monthly reviews journal published by Cell Press on the topic of applied biology in all of its various forms. You can get in touch with me with my email address here, and I encourage you to check us out on Twitter at Trends in Biotech. So, broad scope, I'm going to start by talking about how review articles are different from research articles. And maybe you already know part of this, but I think probably the most important and the most obvious thing is that there's no methods or data in reviews. There are some exceptions for unusual review formats like meta-analysis or the systematic review. Reviews are broad. We're taking a lot of the different aspects of the literature and synthesizing them rather than being narrowly focused on one question. And therefore, we expect them to be read by a wider audience. In particular, they might be used as teaching tools, or if a new person is joining a lab or starting a research project in a new field, they might read the review to get up to speed. The novelty in a review, rather than discovering something or observing or creating a new thing, is in having something new to say. And in some cases, in some journals, a review article can only be submitted either with an invitation from the editor or by prior consultation and discussion with the editor. So what does that mean if you're peer reviewing a review article versus a research article? And I want to say that the rest of the presentation assumes that you know at least some of the basics about how to be a peer reviewer. If you're completely new to peer review, that's fine. We have a lot of really great resources on Research Academy and on the Cell Press blog Crosstalk that I encourage you to check out. Some similarities. So first thing, be professional, objective. These are your colleagues whose work you're reviewing, and they're also reviewing your own work. And so just make sure to maintain some collegiality. You want to understand what the journal is asking for. So every journal has different guidelines, expectations, but it's not necessarily your job to police the format. You also don't need to copy edit, so you don't need to be overly concerned with the author's grammar or punctuation, those sorts of things. You really want to work with the editor in all cases. If you think that you're going to have a delay, if you agreed to review something, but it turns out that you can't do it anymore, that's fine. Just make sure that you let the editor know. And in all cases, you are trying to improve the manuscript. It's not your job as the peer reviewer to give a reason why it shouldn't be published. You're trying to make sure that the journal publishes the best content that it can and making sure that the authors put their work out there in the best way they can. But we do have some differences.
Can we finish there, please?
Maybe the most important.
Okay. So when we were doing this, we found it difficult to be professional and objective. What does that mean? As if subjectivity doesn't operate in peer review, particularly around race. The guidelines were something that were confusing as well. And the task is to help the manuscript. That's not my experience of being peer review. I feel when I've done articles, people have been excessively overcritical, particularly when you're writing what Linton said about the reality of the experience of racism. If we go to the next slide, because I'm glad there's some things coming out in the chats. Yeah, so when we finished each session, we did an evaluation. Two things that people learned on the course, because we used their learning to change the course rather than trying to force people into having to understand what the course is about. Two things they would still like to learn, and two suggestions to improve the course, which we're going to ask you in a moment. Just going to go into this last slide before we open up for discussion. Oh, can you go back? No, go forward, please. Can you go forwards? No, go back. Sorry, it's not there. Just go back. Go back a bit. So before we go on, because a little bit behind time now, and because the conversation has been brilliant, I just want to play you a video before we go into discussion. I hope Joan is here to take over about 12:15.
Yeah, I'm here, Colin.
Oh yes, oh my heart can beat again. So let's go to the last video before we have an open discussion. This is a video that we're looking at. Can peer review change practice? So what this video was trying to do, it's the first video. Please apologize for my appearance and my tracksuit. I think the blood's gone behind my wall. This was, can peer review improve something called working across the color line? So what we're doing at the Whiteness and Race Equality Network is trying to improve working relationships. Just going to play this for a few moments, and then we're going to go to the chats. Psychiatrists are human beings. People may say, what are you talking about, Colin? Psychiatrists come from particular cultural influences, value-based, family, schooling, all those things influence who they actually are. And they'll never really be given the opportunity to actually look at maybe what is the sameness that happens in that relationship between black men and white psychiatrists. Yes, so my name is Colin King. I have a diagnosis of schizophrenia since I was 17 years of age. I've had 4 further admissions. Presently, I'm actually being called a lived experience equality advisor, working with the National Health Service, and I've set up an organisation called the Whiteness and Race Equality Network. I suppose the filming is an opportunity to do something that's very rare and unique in the history of mental health. It's beginning to look at 2 sides of a very important story that leads to an overrepresentation of particular communities in the mental health system, which is black young men, and that's kind of known quite publicly now. And there's a lot of research that looks at the experiences of black men and also looks at why this is actually happening. I think the missing point of the story, of the narrative, is the lived experience of people involved in those processes that lead to people being placed in the mental health units. So it's really important, I think, to listen to consultant psychiatrists. So I think we do not hear what takes place, how it takes place, and the lived experiences, predominantly white psychiatrists who are making some very difficult decisions about, firstly, whether they've got a mental disorder in terms of the Mental Health Act, secondly, whether there is a risk factor, and thirdly, where they should actually go. And I think there's an assumption which we need to look at from the stories, the experiences, about how do white psychiatrists understand the broader experiences of black men in the mental health system, but also how do they use their own storyline, their own narrative, their own historical profiles to make decisions. And lastly, which is the really important thing, how can we change that process? If cultural advocacy and cultural competencies are going to work, there is an important reflective responsibility about how I position my world and my reality and my views when I begin to actually take on this psychiatric medical responsibility to assess somebody. And so the film, or the approach, or the model, which is really important, is humanizing psychiatry, humanizing those individual faces, and also giving them the opportunity to say they do have a lived experience, they do have a lived reality, and understanding their first person experiences of working through this. But more importantly, how can we improve those experiences and avoid the polarization and that there's one group against the other, rather than, so how can we come together to make sure the process is fairer and recognizes these different voices and values and how they affect the decision making. And so that decision making is shared and it's more equitable, and there's the more responsibility across the colour line.